And welcome back to the Movie Pope podcast. And today we have another great guest here. We've got Margaret Edwartowski here from Detroit, and she is going to regale us with tales of improv. But before we dive in, remember to like, comment, subscribe, and be sure to share this video with everyone that you know. And as always, thank you so much for watching this video, and let's go ahead and dive in. Margaret, how are you doing this fine Saturday, what is it, the 17th?
17th. I'm doing well,
old.
thank
I'm getting
you.
old here.
That's okay. I had to look at my computer's, calendar too, so I get it. I'm doing well, thank you.
So Margaret, so initially, when we chatted, this was like way back in August or like last summer, let's say. I could easily look at my email, but I'm also lazy as I get older. But but I originally found you guys when I was looking for guests from the from the film festival scene, and at that time I sent an email to the Detroit Can Film Festival, and you responded, and I initially thought that it was you who was behind all of that, but then you introduced me to Nick, and we had a very, very wonderful interview, and I'll have a link to that down in the description below. But during that interview, he was telling me about how you were a big name, in Detroit, especially in the Detroit improv scene, and that perked my ears up. I'm like, oh, good Lord, I need to get her on my show now. I've been chatting with her, and I had no idea. So here we are. So, Margaret, let's just go ahead and kick things off. Tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, what you do, and how you ended up, doing improv and running the Detroit Can Film Festival, or getting involved in the film festival scene, I should say.
Sure. Maybe I'll work from today backward rather than start from the beginning. You never know, writing a bio, like, do I start from the beginning or the end? So currently I'm the executive director for Y Arts, which is the arts and humanities branch of the YMCA of Metropolitan Detroit, which basically means we keep on a stable of about 20 teaching artists in theater, media arts, and visual arts. And then we do programming in YMCA branches, in schools, wherever in the community that can be. And we also have a theater and a gallery. So I'm very blessed to have a day job that is not only in the arts, but also that serves the community. So it's really fulfilling, and I get to work with youth, but also I get to make opportunities for artists. So, so a lot of my focus is about making the Metro Detroit creative community, as contributing to it being as robust as possible, both in like developing young people's creativity and also keeping artists in the area. So through that work and through some mutual friends, I know a guy named Tommy Simon, who is a fellow improviser, who is friends with Nick, and Nick and I have a lot of mutual friends. Actually, it's a small town in a lot of ways, creative town.
Right.
So I got to meet Nick, who is an absolutely fascinating and wonderful character, and I'm so glad he came into my life. But he had this idea of a film festival for young people to tell stories in initially 10-second films,
Right.
and we would pick this socially relevant topic, and then do that, and then we give away cash prizes and scholarships and stuff, and it's an amazing program. So that's kind of how we connected, and I have the opportunity, and we host that at the theater at the Y, and I do a lot of the trying to get young people to do that, but it ties in with this youth media program we run out of the Y called Y Media Works, which is for middle and high school youth. Used to be more of a filmmaking oriented program, but then once equipment became so accessible and more affordable equipment could do more, then we were able to instead of worrying about doing sustainability with funding for equipment, we were able to focus on content. Okay, I'm getting way off track on the bio. So before the Y, I was an actor, a playwright, and a teacher. I got a theater degree from Wayne State University, and then in Detroit, and then I was with the Second City Comedy Theater. They had one here in Detroit, so I was with that for probably about 10 plus years, more 20. And then I started an improv company at the Planet Ant Theater in Hamtramck. So I've been sort of the like, I don't want to say it, like the emeritus, you know, a lot of my friends left town, so I became the grand grandma of improv in Detroit. But you know, my friend Nancy Hayden and I have a 2-woman troupe called Bottle of Red, and so we're sort of the veterans in town, and are kind of involved that way. So yeah, so that's kind of my general creativity, and now I'm doing a lot of fiction writing. Predominantly in romance novels, so that's a whole other world.
Oh, okay, romance. So is it sort of like those old school? What's his name? Fabian or Fabiano?
Oh, Fabio.
Fabio.
You know, funnily
stories?
enough, even though the books are still as spicy as they once were, nowadays the trend is to have illustrated covers. I think because women of today still want the same content without the same obvious wrapper. So
well, it's not. I mean, as a guy, right, and as someone who was familiar with seeing those, with those generic romance novels from the 1990s, I always thought that they were pretty much all the same. It's like this fantastical, scene set in a faraway land in a distant time where the lady is always, wearing a corset and they are, besotted with this roguish man with flowing blonde hair who's like, "My lady, I've come to serve you," and it's just like, and they just swoon because, for whatever reason they find accents so sexy.
Yes.
Speaking of which, I'm about to get off topic here, but I just feel like
I already did that like 4 times, so I think
you set the precedent. So I remember back in elementary school, we had to go. We went to this camp in South Carolina called Camp Thunderbird, and there was one of the camp counselors. His name was Marcel, and he was from the UK. And can you believe it? All these 12 and 13-year-old girls were all of a sudden just crowding around. I'm like, oh my God, Marcel, and they're just and as you can imagine, they're all asking him to like just say certain words. Can you say this or can you say that? And he would say, and all the girls would just like start clapping. All the guys, you can imagine, all the guys would just stand like, whatever, like this jerk here, yeah, whatever. And for whatever reason, whenever he said Adidas, he said Adidas, right? That's how they say it in the UK. Whenever he said Adidas, the girl, like, I swear to God, it was like feeding time at the zoo. It's like all of a sudden, like the whole camp would just burst out into like this giddy giggle and clapping, and all the guys would just be like, "Yep, he said Adidas. Yep,
aluminium." Yeah, I had when I first got in the touring company in Second City of Detroit, there was a fella in the company who was from Ipswich, and he was a really funny guy, and we had a running gig. So we're in the touring company, so we had a lot of time to kill in the van. So one of our running bits we constantly did was like, I was American girl, whoever, and he was, British guy who was really kind of just a jerk, but no matter what he did, I would swoon because he had the accent. So like he could treat me like utter garbage and I'd be like, I know, so I'm free later, it didn't matter what he said.
Well, what's funny is that to us, right? Whenever we hear an English accent, doesn't matter where it's from. We, well, I should say American women anyway. Us guys couldn't give two shits. They kind of just get excited and giddy. Whereas in the UK, if you speak with someone from the UK, they're like, "Oh yeah, if you're from this part of the country, we kind of look down on you because we think you're a bunch of yokels, right?" Whereas if you're from here, it's like, "Oh, you must be prim and proper," because they still have that class mentality, so apparently if you speak the King's English, that means you're all right. Oxbridge,
Receive
top of the heap, right?
Yeah.
Whereas if you're a Scouse, or if you're from Yorkshire, or if you're talking talking
Norfolk,
some sort of accent, then they're like, "Oh yeah, you're just from the sticks." It's kind of the equivalent of how they would, of how people from New York would look at people from the South,
Oh yeah,
a bunch of bumpkins.
Yeah, it's fascinating the number of of dialects, and it's been a fascination of mine to try to learn as many of them as I can, but some of them are pretty out there.
But that's the thing though, because in my young mind, right, when I was taking acting classes, I always thought, the true mark of an actor isn't to make the scene your own, or to make us believe that you really are this person, or you're really experiencing these emotions.
Yeah.
It was the fact that if you could affect a convincing accent, that meant you were a really, really good actor, you know. But mind you, like, this was like all the way back in like middle school, high school years.
Oh
So
yeah.
I thought, so in my mind, so if I saw like an American actor and they couldn't do it, an accent, I just thought, well, he must be a really, really shit actor, right?
But he's like killing it method wise,
Exactly.
His
So
accent's terrible, but his acting is incredible.
right.
And
So
yet he's
yeah.
terrible.
So for instance, like like Christopher Cooper, because I remember my drama teacher talking about how Christopher Cooper is one of those actors who's like underrated because he steals the scene in every movie that he's in, but he's never been nominated. I've never seen a movie where he's done an accent, but
Does he have a little natural twang though?
I always thought that was just his natural way of speaking, because because if you watch October Sky, I mean, I just assumed like that was his natural accent, like he was Homer's dad. Or if you watched one of the Spider-Man movies where he's like Norman Osborn, it's like, oh, I guess Norman Osborn has a Southern twang to him, right? I mean, the same would go for George Clooney, because George Clooney is a mighty fine actor, but obviously I've never seen him do an accent, and yet in my mind I was like, well, yeah, he may have won a few Oscars, but I don't think he's a very good actor.
He can't do dialect, so he's bad.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'll forgive him anything for the Ocean's movies. Those were
exactly. So we were talking about this earlier, but you did mention this at the beginning. You did mention that you were with Second City, and Second City does have a pretty stellar reputation for cranking out high profile stars who have graced the screen probably since the late 60s, early 70s, because a lot
1959.
of
it was
59. Okay. Yeah, because I remember reading somewhere that a lot of the people who started off with Lorne Michaels SNL at the time, they came from Second City, and some as recent as Cecily Strong and Adie Bryant, who I did not realize was in Second City. They've been on SNL and they've been killing it. Yeah. But can you talk a little bit about Second City, what it was like to be a part of it? Because I always imagined it was kind of like, I always imagined Second City was like the American equivalent to the Cambridge Footlights, right?
Yeah, I could see that. So here in Detroit, the way it rolled out was the Ilitch family, who owns the Tigers and the Red Wings and the Fox Theater. They're kind of like the entertainment magnate of Detroit, right? And also consider, Second City opened in Detroit in the early 90s, which was the very beginning of our, depending on your point of view, like rebirth, renewal, right? Like when the white flight sort of U-turned and people started investing in the city again. So so one of the son of this famous family had seen Second City in Chicago, was like, I want to bring it to Detroit. So it started in the early 90s. I got involved. I was cast in the touring company. I auditioned myself and 5 guys, and they needed a woman, so it worked out great for me. I got into the touring company there, and then after a short time I was in the resident company there. And basically for that, you would do 7 shows a week. You would write a sketch show with the company, and then you would do free improv sets each night after the shows to generate material for the next review. And so I was there for about 3 years. And during that time, I mean, they talk about it being the equivalent of a master's degree in comedy. I would say acting too, to some degree.
Right.
Because you have to be young to do this job, because you're just like, you rehearse all day, you do the show, you do the set, you're young, so you stay up, doing whatever you do all night,
So basically,
and
so
then you
basically,
do
it's
it
like a
all over
full-time
again.
thing, then, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah, that was the job.
Okay.
And so it was kind of cool to have a few years where it was like, I'm just a performer. And at that time too, they would put you on billboards and ads in the Joe Louis Arena at the time. So there was a certain amount of like regional treasure kind of treatment. So it was a very exciting time. And then you're still connected to like the mothership in Chicago, right? So you it's an incredible networking thing for an actor. It's an incredible set of skills that you pick up. But also, the people that you're with, it's like you're it's almost like military buddies that you've gone through war with, right? Like there's a bonding that you experience there that is like no other.
So I'm assuming you've got like a tattoo somewhere. There was like, Second City 97, right?
Not yet, but I'm
It's like
considering it.
it's like whenever you meet up, you're like, oh hey, I remember you. Like show each
Right.
other's tattoos.
Yeah. Well, it is funny because we were talking before we recorded, like most of the people out of Detroit would go to Chicago and then eventually LA. So like half my heart is in LA, and it's now been far more years than I would like to admit since those days. But still, I could call any one of those folks up and be like, I'm coming. Can I stay on your couch? Yes, I miss you. I love you. Let's be together. We're a family. And Detroit had an extremely like just vibrant amount of talent in those late 90s years, at least in the community I was within, between the Second City and the Planet Amp Theater, and eventually a theater that opened called Go Comedy. There was just so many incredible people that came out of here at that time.
So did a lot of your friends and acquaintances, did they make that flight to LA?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, a lot of them got pulled into Second City shows in Chicago.
Right.
One of the things that I think worked in the favor of Detroit is that we were sort of ahead of the game in the diversity whole thing, because we always had people of color in our cast, which was important because we were a Black city. It would be completely disingenuous because improv and sketch tended for many, many years to be like super white. So we had a lot of, so Keegan-Michael Key was here, and a lot of other really talented BIPOC performers who would then be brought into these other spaces, Chicago predominantly, but also Toronto, because that community hadn't been fostered as much, I think, outside of Detroit.
So I did want to back up a little bit because because you did mention something very, very important, because you said that being in Second City was sort of like getting an MFA in acting and theater. Was there an expectation, or was there like a requirement for you to have a substantial like either a degree in theater or a substantial CV in theater before joining Second City?
That's an excellent question, and it's where I get I'll put my snooty hat on for a second. So I'm, like I said, I have a BFA. So I'm at the core a theater person, but there's a huge spectrum within this art form of wackadoo comedy to really intense, like, theatrical improvisation. You don't have to have a degree necessarily to be cast. I think during my time, and most of the time, like, if you are coming to this from theater, it's going to make you a lot better at it because it's still acting, right? It's not stand-up. But I have seen some really incredible people, like Mark Warzeka, Tim Robinson, some of these folks that just went straight into it as very young people who didn't go to college for theater, and they're incredible. So it depends on the path and the person. But if I had my druthers, I think it's it's pretty important to have people with a degree, because when you're running a show, right. You could tell, and some of us would get snootier about it, like who had been trained to run shows over long periods of time, right? Because the actors in the group would work on their performance until they said it, and then we're going to perform that. Even though it'll be live and in the moment, we're not going to change lines or blocking or, throw our scene partners off in any way, because we've honed a show. Whereas some people who were less stringent on the theater would, I'm gonna throw something fun out and keep it lively, and you're like,
that's amateur stuff, right?
Right. Or oh, look at you breaking. Oh, you think it's so fun, like Jimmy Fallon laughing,
or ghosting your
right, right, breaking character, and
Yeah, because as someone who did theater performance when I was when I was younger, I mean, blocking was such an important thing.
Yeah.
So to me, that to try to do something spontaneous, that's like anathema. That's like, you can't do that.
I know.
That's sacrilegious.
I know. But if all the people in the show are the ones who wrote the show, it gets tricky.
Yeah. So walk me through this. So so obviously everybody's in on it, so to speak. How exactly are people able to kind of know when's their cue? Because because it kind of feels like if everybody's if you've got a bunch of chefs in the kitchen working on the same thing at one time, it can get a little bit confusing. So how do you kind of know how to handle the sort of ordered chaos, so to speak?
Well, there's two different things you're doing there. One is improv and one is writing the show and sketch and stuff. So when we would write the shows, we would have a director. A lot of times, and this was really incredible, you would get an opportunity for some really veteran Second City people to come in, and then you would get a whole education out of that. So that director would, watch the sets, say, let's visit these scenes. During the day, you would, you'd bring in scripts, very much like I'm sure what any other writer's room is like. Everybody's bringing in a bunch of sketches to see if they can get them in the show, So that is directed. When you're improvising, the thing you're relying on is everybody sort of has the same rule book or sensibility, because you've been trained in this same theater with their same sort of yes and approach, and all of these sort of concepts of like, don't start the scene as strangers, try to avoid questions, like all of these things that if you follow them and are able to connect to and listen to your partner, you can find some pretty amazing stuff.
So now that you mentioned that, are those like the rules that everybody has to follow? Like you can't deviate from that premise?
I think like any art form, some of the most incredible things break all the rules, right? But I think like any art form, you still have to learn your scales before you can play Mozart or Beethoven or whatever.
Right.
So you got to know the rules to be able to break them. But I mean, I think one of the main things is if you can find that, and it's the same in any art form, that lovely pocket of the zone where, the people that are playing are super connected and they're riding the, sort of vibe of the scene, and not trying to stand there and say funny lines to each other, you can kind of do anything.
Gotcha. So walk me through what was your process like when you were in Second City? Like, what did you learn? Who did you connect with, and how did you find your niche in developing your skills as a writer and as an actor, and how did that translate into what you're doing, what you were doing later on in life?
That's an excellent question.
It's a loaded question.
It is. It's a big one. Well, the funny thing is, during that time, so we had this really amazing director called Ron West. He was on, I think, the British Who's Line. We called him the doctor because he was like the script doctor. He could make your stuff into really good stuff when it started off not very good. Right. But he used to talk about on paper people, right? So in the cast, there would be people who loved to write it down and come in with this scene completely fleshed out. And there were other people like myself and Keegan who would much prefer to come at it from an acting perspective and would be more figuring it out on stage. So at the time I was not a writer. I didn't like to sit down and write. It was not my thing at all. I was an actor, but now I'm a writer. And I think that was from that training, right? I think the really hugest thing you get out of that training is the ability to collaborate well, because you have so many instances where you have to surrender yourself to the better of the scene or the show,
right,
or the song or whatever the thing is. And then you see it succeed and realize I'm a cog in the machine, right?
You're not a special snowflake.
No. Or, like some of what we did was re-improvising. So you would improvise a scene and like there'd be an amazing line I discovered one night. And then the next night in that moment, I would go to say it and somebody next to me would totally pooch it and say it for me. And they'd get a bigger laugh. And while I was mad at them for stealing my line, I'd be like, I just wrote a really successful line. Somebody else is saying it, So you learn collaboration and also some flexibility. But then the other thing that came out of it for me was this sort of validation as a writer to say, wait a minute, I am a writer. I wrote 10 years worth of shows, so that when I wrote my first play, it was like, well, why wouldn't I write a play? I know how to write a play. I wrote a million scenes. Let's just put them together. And so that then when I wanted to write a book, I was like, well, I could write a book. I've written a million plays, so every next step was validated from that initial experience.
So, so I've been down the same path as you because I dreaded writing. Like I always thought, I can perform, I can do this and that, but writing is not for me. And I think the hardest part was writing in a way that you heard the other person's voice in your head, so that when you wrote it, it didn't sound like you were saying it. It kind of sounded like someone else was saying it. I mean, I'm sure that must have like clicked in your head when you when you wrote your first play or your first scene, and you're like, wow, this is totally sounds like something that someone else would say, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah, I mean, and again, that's from the time of not being an on paper person, right?
Mm-hmm.
To today, I still approach everything the same way. And it's this: if I create a character, I'm approaching it as an actor saying, if I were playing that character, what would be important to me? What would be my motivation? What would I use to change the other person's mind? You know what I mean? Like, what's my quirk? Like, do I like to chew gum? And did I quit smoking and now I eat licorice? Like, what is it? And honestly, I'll tell you this. My real writing process is during my half-hour commute to the city is just like saying the story out loud, playing the characters.
Right.
Like, to myself, playing an improv set alone in the car. I'm sure I look like a nut in traffic, but
well, that makes two of us then.
Do you do the same?
Yeah.
Oh, yes. So do you write film stuff?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, so I went to film school. Well,
okay.
I well, it's not really film school. I went to a school with a film program, and initially, initially when I was required to write scenes, because everybody has to take an intro to screenwriting class, right?
Yeah.
So so when I sat down to write my first scene, I was just like, how the hell am I going to square this? Because none of this makes sense. It's all on paper, and you come to realize, if you actually like talk it out, like walking around and actually talking the scene out, talking as if you were in that character, it begins to flow out, and then you're like, okay, I gotta slow down. I gotta be able to write all of this down, because because it's just like with anything. It's like when you're learning something, yeah, you can write it down, but it's not going to make any sense unless you actually like try to like work it out. Either like a good example is studying a foreign language, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can listen to all these tapes and write and read all these articles, but it's not going to click until you actually practice speaking the language.
Yeah.
So so
immersion.
Yeah, exactly. So and I think you'll agree with this too. When you're in that writing process, you have to immerse yourself in that role,
Mm-hmm.
which would include trying to speak in the guise of that character. And and as you do it more and more often, you begin to become more comfortable to the point where I don't want to sound crazy, but you kind of have the split personality where
Oh
it's
yeah,
like where it's like there's me, right? But then there's the character that I'm developing, and I'm not that character, and that character is not me, but I understand very well what makes this person tick,
yeah,
and it becomes second nature because it's like because when you hand the script off to somebody and you're like, all right, this is what I want you to do, if the person's not getting it, yeah, yeah, I mean, you can get a bit defensive, but at the same time,
sure,
like you mentioned yourself with learning how to collaborate, you have to learn how to take, you know, input from other people and kind of like merge it into the character that you're creating because yeah, you created this character, and yeah, I mean, you spend a lot of time trying to develop who this person is, but at the end of the day, you are not playing that person. You're handing that person off to this actor who is going to take on that role for you, and they have to be able to assume assume that character but make it feel natural. So
yeah,
obviously so obviously if you say things a certain way, obviously that'd be nice if the actor could say it that way, but if it doesn't sound natural to them, you kind of have to be man enough or woman enough to realize, I can let this person tweak it a little bit to make it sound natural as long as they keep the core of who that person is,
absolutely.
and remain
It's
faithful
hard.
to it. Oh, I mean, I do have to ask. So what was it like, learning to collaborate for the first time? Because I can't imagine it's very easy when you start off because what you think is funny, another person may not think is funny at all, and you're like, well, what do you mean it's not funny? Like, do you want to
Mm-hmm.
like, sir, do you want to go outside? I'll show you what's funny.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have some challenges, or at least in the beginning. Well, no, I still have them. I mean, I'm an Aquarius and a youngest child, so there are definitely times where I like dig my heels in. Like my critique group will tell you, like, I'm like, yeah, but it's a good idea, so stop giving me notes on it. My husband will break his neck nodding at me saying I can dig my heels in. But for the most part, my hope is to have the approach of like, hey, and this is how I am as a manager at work, or at least I like to think I am, is like, I believe that I have a finite amount of ideas. And well, a lot of them are brilliant. There's so much more. And so if I have a team that I'm working with, the exponential increase of the possibilities bringing their ideas to the table, I mean, makes us able to do so much.
Right.
So really, honestly, the hardest part of getting good at collaborating isn't just the like dealing with the disappointment when somebody isn't like falling all over themselves about your idea. It's legit hearing and embracing somebody else's idea. And I mean, that's that whole concept of yes and, right? But it's because we always talk about, I don't know if I should swear, but it's like BS, my line, BS, my line, right? It's like,
Yeah,
whatever you
exactly.
have to say, fine, just get it out of the way because I want to say the thing that I have to say, right? But to actually slow down and like hear what the other person's saying and really trying to understand that idea and then give it a try, like, fly it up the flagpole. I mean, that's where the real good type of surrender is in collaboration.
Yeah, and then the moment comes when you realize, oh shit, they were right the entire
Oh
time.
God. Oh, I know. I mean, and
It-
you feel like this really grown up person that you let it finally get to that place, but then you're also like, oh, what a petulant jerk I was in the beginning. Like,
well, the cherry on top is when you sit there and you're like, damn, like, why didn't I think of that?
or
It's
also
not,
like, why did I fight it for so long?
I know, and then I know, and then you have to go outside and bang your head against the wall because you're like, I
Oh.
can't believe myself. So
And then you think of the idea that you wanted to do instead and how awful it is in comparison. Like, oh, why was I fighting for the donut shop scene? This hockey thing is way better.
So I want to talk more about the comedy scene in Detroit
Mhm,
because obviously you mentioned Second City started off in the 90s, but then
mhm,
a lot of the talent kind of transitioned. They moved to Chicago first,
mhm.
and then they migrated to LA, and then to a lesser degree New York City. What what's the scene been like since since that period? Like, have there been any has there been like a renaissance of talent, or is there like a certain like dearth of comedic talent, or what's going on up there?
Well, it's interesting because, I think my perspective post-pandemic is a little more limited than it would have been because once it was like I played every Monday night. Like that was our night at Planet Ant for 20 plus years. I played every Monday night. And then it was
Mhm.
like, oh, I can stay home. I have to stay home, right? It was during COVID. But then it was like, I don't really want to go anywhere on a Monday night after work. So I'm less well versed in, like what the talent level is or whatever. But activity wise, it never stopped. And I am proud of that because I was definitely part of that. I think the time when I left in 99, there was sort of a sense of like, if you didn't leave town, you weren't serious about this thing, right?
Yeah.
Like you might be talented, but you just didn't have what it took because you didn't leave. And full disclosure, I'm like a plus size actress, right? Or hate the word actress, but I'm a woman of size who is an actor, and that does not have a very bright, happy future in LA. Just to be honest, with like the types of things pre bless her, AD Bryant, who made a huge difference with things like Shrill and being in that place. But so it wasn't a life that I was really like seeking out. And in the theater, I can be a lot of different things, but on film, I have to be certain things, right? So, and also, for lots of other reasons, family and just there were things to do here that I was interested in doing. So I stayed.
Right.
So, some friends and I established the program at the Planet Ant. And then, like I said, this Go Comedy opened shortly thereafter. There have been different entities within Ann Arbor, which is about 45 minutes from Detroit. So that's still kind of regionally, the scene. But and now Planet Ant is like multiple spaces and they have a stand-up spot. Now the old Second City space, because Second City was only here through probably the early 2000s, like 2006 or so.
Right.
Um Now that old space downtown has become a stand-up theater. So I do think that like comedy is on a resurgence right now. Um, but I'm like a different generation than a lot of the people that are doing it. So I'm not as keyed into it. But one thing I can tell you stylistically about Detroit, and especially for those of us who came out of it before the city was really sort of fixed up, is like we have hustle. Like there's this whole Detroit hustles harder, right? And
Yeah.
um, and we're very loyal to one another. And I think part of that comes out of like if your city has been the punchline for everybody's joke for many years or looked down on, um, you have each other to rely on, right? So even when everybody was out in LA or Chicago or whatever, Detroiters are together, right? And support each other.
Right.
Um,
They remember their roots, right?
yeah, for sure. But also like our there's also a really strong um desire for authenticity in the work. So kind of that character stuff you were talking about of like, it's not necessarily over the top characters. We're not, um like silly, like some of the British humor might be. It's a lot of really rooted, um, but we go hard for sure.
Like a slice of life kind of comedy.
Hmm. Yeah.
Gotcha.
Not and you not no fronting, like no putting on airs or anything. Everything is like it's okay to be stripped down and is what it is, kind of.
So to circle back, because you said that that you're teaching these classes to the younger generation. What kind of what have you seen with with these younger talent? Like what are you trying to I mean, I don't want to make it sound like you're brainwashing anybody, but what are you trying to impart? What kind of lessons are you trying to impart on younger talent as they're making their way up in the scene?
Yeah, my work with the Y has been a real blessing because it allowed me to sort of push out stuff and invest in youth, and that's a beautiful thing. One of the things we really try to do is help develop an understanding of the creative process and how that can be a platform for your voice as a young person. I think one of the things that we make the mistake of when approaching especially teens with programming is, what do we want them to do, right? Or what do we want to teach them?
Right.
And if you've ever
they're so impressionable, you know.
Oh, for sure. And what they really want is to be little versions of crusty old adults. Like, they're dying for that.
Never.
No. But if you've ever watched or been an adult talking at a room full of teenagers, you understand how ineffective that approach really is.
Mm-hmm.
But also, I think some of these intergenerational, now I'm Gen X, right? So I'm not in the generation wars. I get to sit on the side with the popcorn. But some of the challenges we have intergenerationally are similar to the conversation we just had about collaboration, right? Like, we're not listening to each other or understanding where the other one's coming from. And so in our work, especially in the media program, it's really about, like, I'm not here to tell you what to say in this video. I'm going to obviously, like, it's the why, so I want to keep the content somewhere within our core values, right?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
But what I'm here to do is to teach you how to develop and tell an effective story. And I'm here to teach you how to visually represent that story in the medium of video, film, but video.
Right.
And then you're going to pour yourself into it, and you're going to say the things you want to say, right? We might frame, like, through the festival this year, we did My Money, My Future, right? Because we did a focus group, because then we even learned this lesson, Nick and I did, of, instead of us saying, what do we think young people want to talk about that's socially relevant? We did a focus group with the young people from the year before to say, what do you want to say that's socially relevant?
Yeah, that actually makes sense. Like, why don't we just ask them what they're concerned about?
You'd be so surprised, though, like, and to me, not just everyone around me, to me in this work, like, how many times you relearn the lesson of just ask them. Because, there's always like, I wonder what they would think. It's like, I don't know. Why don't you ask them?
Well, it's funny because I remember watching an episode of the Vietnam War, the documentary by Ken Burns, and and there was this clip that they played from the David Frost show, where this where Spiro Agnew was brought onto the show to talk to these younger kids, and one of the interviewers was like, she told Spiro Agnew, she was like, I mean, you're basically misrepresenting us. You're making our parents be afraid of us, and that's not the case at all. I mean, and I feel like that's the case today, because I remember reading an article, surprise, surprise, Fox News. But I do want to be fair. I read from all news sources because I want to be equal in everything.
Well, and understand all of the perspectives before you make your decisions.
Yeah, exactly. And the article was saying how Gen Zers were basically basically coming up with all these misconceptions about Gen Xers, and Gen Xers were like, hold on, where are you getting this information from? That is not who we are at all.
Oh my gosh.
And I just feel like there's a lot of misrepresentation, and what's even sadder is the fact that some I'm not saying all of them, but some people within those generational groups have pretty much, to use your phrase, have dug their heels in and have refused to budge. And I think what you're doing is is very important, because it's breaking down those generational barriers and kind of creating a dialogue where you guys can communicate with each other, because obviously generations aren't, they're not always going to be able to communicate in the same way, right? Because I'm a millennial, so the stuff that that would vibe with me, obviously wouldn't necessarily vibe with you, but they wouldn't necessarily, but what I think and what I believe wouldn't vibe with someone who was who's of a younger generation, right? So So obviously, what you're doing is very much it. If not totally eliminating it, just breaking down the barriers to the point where they can kind of communicate effectively and get their point across without having to resort to these misconceptions and these stereotypes that you're reading in these articles.
Yep. Yeah.
So
Yeah, I was appropriately checked, and this made a huge difference for me because now I am like hugely invested in the Y has diversity, equity, inclusion, global committee, and then I'm really invested in that at work. And part of it was this experience, and you're a millennial, so you will know this. Early on with millennials, there was so much trash talk about millennials, right? Because
2008 to 2013, I remember it quite well.
Yes, right in that era.
By the way, Mr. Ridley Scott, F you. Just saying.
Oh, was he leading the charge?
I mean, you remember that movie, The Last Duel?
No.
It was basically Ben Affleck and Matt Damon dressed up as knights in medieval France, and it bombed in the box office. And Ridley Scott basically said
they wouldn't be the guys I would cast in that kind of thing, but
yeah. So Ridley Scott basically said the reason why the movie bombed was because millennials just didn't get it, and everybody was up in arms. And I was like, you know what? Fuck you, Ridley Scott.
Honest to God.
I saw the movie, Margaret. If you watch that movie, you will agree it is trash, right?
Sure, it is.
And
I don't have to. The two of them doing a historical costume drama. That's not the millennials' fault.
No, it's just Mr. Ridley Scott's fault, and he compounded it by making Napoleon, which is
going over just as well. Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's one of those times I wish I was blind because what the hell was this?
You want to wish you had the little thing from Men in Black so you could erase your memory.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. Well, so during that time, I was just as bad as anyone because, there were things coming up like at work. They were like, millennials will need more feedback and you need to adjust that. I'm like, like everything that millennials did with I want to work from home more. Well, at the time, nobody did that. So I'm like, how dare you? This is where work happens. And all these things that they wanted to change. And we'll get to this in a second, but I think all of these culture and generational problems are about dealing with change. But so at the time, I really jumped 2 feet first into those dang millennials, right? And then I shared this article on Facebook that was about these millennials just want life to be like a unicorn or something. There was something like, they're the, participant medal children and this and that kind of thing.
It didn't help that the hipster was a thing at that time too.
And that was in the hipster era. Exactly. Yep. So a friend of mine, or more than acquaintance, but not call each other kind of friends, called me out on Facebook in the comments, you know me, and I'm a millennial, and I'm offended that you posted this because I'm not like this. And thank you for, the gross generalization there. And right. I heard it, and I caught myself. And then I was like, wow, I just broad brushed an entire generation publicly. And I took my lumps. And ever since I, took people one person at a time versus, and it's made a huge difference. And now the millennials are 40. So
yeah, most of us have white hair now. So
right. But a lot of it was, I don't like that you want to change my workplace. You're the one coming in, so you should do what I say. Those kinds of things. And now people don't want to say pronouns, and then they get upset about that.
Well, I was gonna say because because back in the 80s and 90s, I mean, the boomers were basically saying, "Oh, those Gen Xers, what the hell's going on with them?" And obviously REM encapsulated in a wonderful song, "What's the Frequency Count?" Because because obviously everybody during that time was trying to figure out what the hell's going on with these kids because nobody could figure out what was going on with them because they're just lazy. Apparently, they're all sniffing glue. And what is the deal with wearing flannel? Has everybody turned into a lumberjack or something?
Well, here's the thing that everybody missed, right? And I can tell you this from the inside because this is my time. Grunge and this, everybody's a stoner who doesn't want to do anything with their lives, came from we're the OGs of not going to do as well as our parents, right? So like when and I do honestly feel for millennials and Gen Z, because the economic situation is just out of control.
Yeah, because
But
because by comparison, what was going on in the late 80s, early 90s, was pretty tame compared to what happened in 2008 and to what's happening right now.
But I feel like we were one of, and we're not the first ones to ever, because every generation is like a rehash of another one. But of those that are alive now, we were we came after the literal boom. Like everybody was going to have a pension and a house and maybe even a cottage and a vacation and all these things. And we were made clearly aware early on that this wasn't going to be the case for us. And me as an artist, I knew it wasn't going to be the case for me. Like I was going to be lucky to have health insurance, So, I mean, when you know that no matter how hard you work, you're only going to get so far. And then on top of it, all of your popular culture is like, let's be mad and wear flannel. And like, oh, what's the movie? It's Winona Ryder and Ethan Hawke, and Ben Stiller was like the preppy guy in it. I can't think of it, but it's like the grunge Bible, like the
Reality Bites.
Yes, Reality Bites. It's the the Gen X Bible. Like,
right.
If you want to know what Gen Xers thought or behaved like in that time, that's your movie. Like that and Singles and like a couple other ones where it's like, we're more interested in being cool. And, look, as I look back on Reality Bites, I'm like, Ben Stiller was kind of annoying, but he had such a great job. Like why are we going for Ethan Hawke, the troubled guy who treats you like crap? Because that's what we did. But we were really in this sort of leaning into our Eeyorehood as a generation, because
because y'all were the angry generation. I remember that.
And then we just like kind of put our heads down, tried to figure it all out, and disappeared into the wings. And then everybody started fighting. We were like, oh. And then they don't even list us in the demographic lists, like we're like, that's fine.
Really?
Well, I mean, there's always articles or things. There was like a graphic going around that was like from, some local or maybe cable news thing that was like, here's what Gen Z is like, here's millennials are like, here's what boomers are like. And we're like,
that's right. That's right. Because I remember reading an article like a few years ago, and they're like, the baby boomers, from this period, there's like there's like a huge spike, and obviously they're going to show those bar graphs, right? And then they're like, from like 1980 to 1995, these are the millennials, and it's like this huge spike, and then Gen Z, and then like in between the boomers and the millennials, you had like this small little lump, and they're like, yeah, this is Gen X. I'm like,
I don't think we were a big window either, right?
Yeah, because y'all had like the smallest window, because you were between 65 and 79, I think. Whereas with the boomers, obviously they went from 45 to 60, 64. It was like
post-war till Beatles came.
Yeah, basically, and then my generation, basically anybody born from the 80s up until what I like to say the end of Pete and Pete, or millennials. Right?
Anyone born during dial-up, basically.
Yeah, exactly. So Margaret, I want to go and just wrap things up a bit. I mean, we could talk about this generational thing. Like,
I mean,
seriously.
that was, speaking of non sequiturs, that was amazing.
I mean, you want to know what's funny? Is like back in high school, my sophomore year English teacher said, Luca, you are a non sequitur, because I was just all over the place, and then I was like, I'm going to make it my title. I'm going to call myself the non sequitur.
That's great.
So so that's where we are now. But if people are interested, are learning more about you, or following you, or reaching out to you, where can they do that?
So for my YMCA life, so that would be, you could go to our site. It's ymcadetroit.org/yarts, all one word. And that'll kind of cover the work we do in the community. That also will have information about the Detroit Can Film Festival, DCFF.
Right.
And then for my the theater that I founded the stuff in is called Planet Ant Theater, so that'd be planetant.com. And then for my author life, my pen name is Maggie Elliott, Eliot, 1L1T. And I have a book coming out. My debut is coming out March 26th.
Ooh, excellent. We'll be we'll be sure to put a link in there, and I'll definitely love to have you come back on to chat more about writing, because I could just talk to you for hours and hours about some
Same. This is fun.
So before we wrap up, obviously, as this is a movie podcast, I have to ask, what's your favorite movie or TV show that you've seen recently you just feel needs to get a shout out, like right now, that's not Reality Bites?
Well, it's kind of appropriate that we were talking about the 90s, because I had been so salty for so long that this series had not been streaming, and they had been fighting over music rights, and it's finally on Prime, and I have been living in it. Northern Exposure. I have been watching it incessantly.
Right.
It came out in 1990. I don't know if you're familiar, but it's doctor who was put through med school by the state of Alaska. He's like a New York Jew.
Mm-hmm.
He has to do then so many years of practice in the state to pay back, them paying his degree. And they didn't have room in the hospital at Juneau or wherever. So they put him in like the middle of nowhere in Alaska. And it's just like an ensemble cast. I love anything like Gilmore Girls or anything like that has like a small town ensemble cast with like lots of great variety of characters. And this is totally one of those. So,
it kind of reminds me of that series Everwood with Treat Williams.
Well, I don't know it. I'll have to look at it.
Okay. Yeah. It was a show that came out on the WB way back like in the early 2000s.
Okay.
And from what you're describing, because I sort of remember Northern Exposure, but not too much, because I was starting kindergarten around.
You're a millennial baby. I know.
I might as well just say it, just because I got nothing to hide. I was born in '87, so by the time
I was a sophomore in high school.
Yeah, so by the time they came out, I was pretty much just like still learning how to.
You were 3.
Poop.
Yeah,
I was learning how to poop, and I got my stuffed bunny rabbit.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I wasn't saying no. I was just saying ow, because I kept getting spanked a lot. Because
yeah.
I was
Honestly,
one of those.
3 is
I was
worse
one of
than
those.
2.
I was one of those kids who like to draw on the walls, and apparently. But if you watch my cartoons on the channel, you'll see what it was like. So.
Yeah, it was not for no reason, right?
But Northern Exposure, I'll tell you what, because I have been going down memory lane recently, right? I started watching Quantum Leap, the original series, not the revival one. So I just got on to season 2. I'm on episode 5 right now. The thing is that I've been doing this thing where I'll watch one episode of Quantum Leap, and then I will watch one episode of Star Trek Enterprise, right? Because Quantum
a Next Generation person, but yes.
Because Quantum Leap came out when I was in diapers, and then Enterprise came out when I was in middle school.
Okay.
So for me, for me, it's just such a fun exercise to kind of see Scott Bakula then. And Scott Bakula.
Oh yeah.
Then, Scott Bakula as a time traveling scientist, and then Scott Bakula as the
space traveling scientist.
Yeah, the first captain of the Enterprise.
Right. That's
so, crazy. So yeah, that's what I'm doing right now. But I just want to thank everybody for taking the time to watch this episode, and just being patient with our non sequiturs, because we did go off tangent a lot. But you know what? It's a podcast, and we have these guests who want to make them feel comfortable. So we are going to riff a little bit. Aww. Nothing wrong with that, and it does give us an opportunity to bring our guests back on for future episodes. But remember to like, comment, subscribe, and please share this video with everybody that you know, because the more watching, the more views that we get, the more attention we get, the bigger our audience can grow. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and we'll catch you in the next one. Ciao.